7. Sexuality and sexual expression throughout life. Okay, we're going to focus in this chapter on sexual expression through an our lifespan. Looking at through the life course. Sexuality is the product of our sexual identity, our sexual orientation, and sexual scripts. First, sexual identity. This is an awareness of ourselves as either male or female, and the ways that one expresses his or her sexual values, attitudes, feelings, and beliefs. Sexuality is multidimensional. It's a multidimensional concept that incorporates psychological, biological, and sociological components, such as things like our sexual desires, our sexual responses, and even our gender roles. Sexual desire is that drive that makes us receptive to sexual activity. Sexual response encompasses the biological aspects of sexuality. And gender roles are the behaviors that men and women enact according to what is culturally defined expectations. Next, sexual identity incorporates, sexual orientation, and you see here the sexuality continuum, which is based on Alfred Kinsey, who did a very intensive study on sexuality, and interviewed people about very, very sensitive topic. And this basically is a continuum, what he arrived at. One end of the continuum, we have exclusive heterosexuality. Number 3, is bisexual. And 6, exclusively homosexual. And number 7 being asexual, not having an interest in sex. And we're going to define some of these terms next. So a sexual orientation is a preference for a sexual partner. It could be a preference for a sexual partner of the same sex, the opposite sex, both sexes, or neither sex. Okay, so homosexuals are sexually attracted to people of the same sex. Gay is usually the term used to reference to men, while lesbian refers to homosexual women. Heterosexuals are attracted to people of the opposite sex, and the term that's most commonly used is straight. Bisexual are people who are attracted to people of both sexes. Asexual, that far end of the continuum, are people who have no interest in or desire for sex at all. I mentioned, it was Alfred Kinsey who studied sexuality and noted that most people feel somewhere on the continuum in terms of sexual desire, attractions, and feelings, and fantasies, and even experiences. So there's a very fluid nature to this concept, according to Alfred Kinsey. He says sexual orientation is not as clear-cut as we would like it to be, or that we believe it to be. And a person's orientation and behavior are not always consistent. For example, he says asexuality may be permanent or just temporary because of choice or because of some effects that, people take medications, and that could have an impact. Because our society is still characterized by heterosexism, or the belief that heterosexuality is superior to and more natural than homosexuality, many gays and lesbians deny or try to hide their sexual orientation. Which leads to this next concept, term homophobia. And homophobia, although less obvious than in the past, it still exists, and this is the fear and hatred of homosexuality. Despite considerable prejudice and discrimination, some people believe that their biological sex their gender identity and a perception of themselves as either masculine or feminine is in conflict. And these individuals have what we call a transgender sexual orientation. So their behavior does not match with the sex that they were assigned at birth. Transsexuals are people who are born with one biological sex but choose to live their life as another sex. They may cross-dress or surgically alter their sex. Intersexuals are people whose medical classification at birth isn't clearly male or female. And this used to be known as a hermaphrodite. So we still often hear that term being used. Transvestites are people who cross-dress but don't necessarily consider themselves a member of the opposite sex. Now, the LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people are men and women who do not identify with any specific sexual orientation. So what actually determines our sexual orientation? Well, we have some biological theories, and biological theories argue that sexual orientation may be strongly shaped by biological factors, particularly the early influence of sex hormones after conception and around childbirth. Also, research shows that early childhood traits and behaviors are related to adult sexual orientation. Now, the social constructionist theories argue that sexual behavior is mainly due to social pressure, and that culture, not biology, plays a larger role in informing our sexual identity. For example, there are the Hijras of India. There are an estimated 50,000 to 5 million who are considered members of a third sex in India. And these are neither male nor female. They're born male. Some are intersexuals, but all dress as women and act in a very feminine way. Researchers believe that a combination of genetic and cultural factors influence our sexual orientation because no one study has really shown that either genes, your genetics, or the environment causes sexual orientation. When it comes to sexual orientation and gender, some researchers believe that gender is a more powerful factor than sexual orientation in shaping a person's behavior or their sexual script. So a sexual script, basically, we all have these internalized sexual scripts. And this is the formal or informal norms or acceptable or unacceptable sexual activity. And includes who are eligible partners, sexual partners, and the boundaries of what our sexual behavior is. Sexual scripts can change over time and across groups, but they are highly gendered in two ways. The first is that women's increased hypersexualization, and the second is a persistent sexual double standard, as well as gender shaping our sexual script. Girls are expected to be feminine and boys masculine. So the expectation for men is that they should be sexually aggressive. And women and girls are sexualized in the media, resulting in very unrealistic expectations. We get these messages, these sexualized messages that are reaching young audiences. Girls at a very early age are becoming obsessed with body image, which we'll see in an advertisement. An example. The media has an impact on this hypersexualization. convincing us that to be popular means to look sexy and to, wear certain clothes and put certain makeup on to really sexualize our look. When it comes to the double standard, it permits greater freedom for men than it does for women. And some believe it is really diminishing, while others argue that women are still expected to confine to committed relationships, and men are allowed to have as many partners as they would like. And here's an example of a billboard ad. Many ads highly sexualize women in their ads, in order to sell products. And then young girls might see these images and aspire to look like this. The next thing we're going to talk about are our agents of socialization. So who in fact influences our sexual behavior? So again, our agents of socialization are our parents, our peers, and our siblings. It could also be the media, popular culture, religion, and even schools in school-based education. So we're going to look at some of these primary sources of sexual socialization. Sexual attitudes and behaviors are learned in a very cultural centered context. So first, our parents. Why are our parents important? Well, ideally, parents or our guardians should be the first and best sex educators because they know their children best. This could have many, many positive outcomes. Providing that sexual knowledge, delaying, first sexual intercourse, lowering any kind of risky behavior, decreasing the number of unwanted pregnancies, and increasing control over sexual behavior. So research has shown that, parents who are very open and, discussing sex with their children as much as possible can reduce some of those risk factors. Parents do face challenges because teens like to spend more time with their friends. They may try to limit, parents may try to limit their dating choices and increase the monitoring of their children's activities. So disagreements often come about. They may argue, have arguments leading to a lot of conflict. So you don't want to have conflict, you want to just have open discussions. Parents very much feel responsible for their child's sex education. However, parents are more likely to talk to their daughters than their sons. And so in other words, we say that these discussions are often very gendered. Many parents' sex education talks are gendered in that parents often, mothers are likely to talk to their daughters, fathers might likely talk to their sons. So they're very different conversations that we might have with our daughters versus our sons. Some parents are in denial that their kids are even having, sex, and often teens resist the talk to communicate with their parents. They may be embarrassed, or they just don't want their parents to be involved or interfere with their behavior and any sort of relationships that they have. And again, here's some of the the data that I just mentioned about teenagers who did talk to their parents by topic, how to say no. Again, females are much more, you see much higher percentage among females than males, and how to say no to sex, using methods of birth control, where to get that birth control, how to avoid sexually transmitted diseases, how to prevent HIV, AIDS, and men are more versed on how to use a condom. And this is a very tiny print, but this table is in your chapter, why many parents don't talk to their children about sex. And it's, it becomes a very uncomfortable situation. They may lack the time, they may not have the knowledge themselves, and they may rely on other, sources, like, finding a book or looking things up. for their children. The next agent of socialization are peers and friends, and even siblings. Peers are the most common source of information, excuse me, about sex. Females are more likely than males to discuss sexual issues with their girlfriends. Adolescents with problems relating with their parents turn to their friends. So even though they aren't the best sources of information, they are more open about discussing sex and encouraging the use of, having safe sex and using condoms. Siblings can play an important role in advising their younger siblings about saying no or about using condoms, especially for boys. So we found that, research has found that, confiding in someone your own age who may be experiencing similar things that you are experiencing at the same time, you may be more open to discuss it with your friends and your siblings. The next agent of socialization is religion. Now, religious parents are usually measured by their degree of religiosity. How frequently do they attend church services? To what degree are they religious? So very religious parents who monitor their children's activities and have strong parent-child relationships tend to delay their children's sexual activity. College students who attend religious institutions, these college students tend to keep religion and their sexual activity separate. A national study of American teenagers found that there is little association between religiosity and their sexual behavior. So it's more an effect by parents than the actual student themselves. The next agent of socialization is the media and pop culture. Media are among the most powerful forces in young Americans' lives today. So in these examples, we're going to talk a little bit movies, television, and video games, and the internet. So the limited are those three things. Movies do not have strictly enforced rating systems, and so X-rated videos are accessible to people today in most age groups. So we're much more exposed to a lot of sexually explicit messages in movies today. This content may not register with some young adolescents, but it shapes sexual decisions, making and reinforcing permissive behavior, permissive sexual norms. When it comes to TV and video games, exposure to sex is a staple on most TV and TV shows. Sexual imagery is very common today in music videos as well. A 2011 Supreme Court ruling that video games are protected under the First Amendment of free speech, stating that parents are the ones that are responsible for what their children use in any kind of video games that might have violent and sexual content. The internet, very big source for sexual health information. Not all good information too. Need to go to a reputable website. Some websites are not providing accurate information. So you need to go to a .org, a .edu, or a .gov site, particularly health and medical sources. The next agent of socialization are school-based sex education programs. Many parents do not feel comfortable and they do not talk to their kids about sex and sexuality, and the media gives us really unrealistic images regarding sexuality, as we just saw. Therefore, many schools and community groups have assumed responsibility for teaching children and adolescents about sex. 90% of parents approve of these school-based programs providing a comprehensive sexuality education, or CSE. It starts in kindergarten and it continues up through 12th grade. It includes age-appropriate, medically accurate information. Topics include things like your anatomy and relationships, abstinence and contraception, and even disease prevention. 26 states require schools to emphasize abstinence, especially in the South, where most schools have adopted abstinence-only curriculums. Advocates also, say that there are the Just Say No programs working at delaying. They're showing evidence that it delays sex until a later age, even until marriage. Other studies are showing otherwise, so there's a mixed bag. But sex education programs that are comprehensive provide accurate information on reproduction. They emphasize abstinence, but they also discuss other sort of safe sex, abstinence, condoms, birth control. So they use a mixture of all the different methods. Again, beginning in elementary school, before adolescents, begin to engage in any kind of sexual activity, and they target high-risk youths as well. These seem to be the most effective. And we see it's becoming highly popularized in many TV programs, reality TV shows, sort of popularizing adolescent sexuality and teen births and teen moms. They're trying to show the reality of what it is like to have a baby at such a young age. The last topic in this chapter that we're going to cover is infidelity, sexual infidelity. When you think about what we want to talk about, what it is, how common is it, why people are unfaithful, and what are some of the consequences. So first of all, what is it? What is sexual infidelity? Well, it is a breach of trust and a betrayal of a relationship. Emotional infidelity is where we see a violation of expectations of a committed relationship. So secrecy, emotional intimacy, and being mutually attracted to someone else is, where somebody's violating that emotional connection. Online infidelity occurs on the internet. It's when someone violates the trust. It can really elicit someone, hurt someone, create anger, depression, insecurity in being online, especially among online romances. When we think about how common is this, about 4% of married people have had sexual relations outside of their marriage. Small percentage. Over a lifetime, about 17% have had report to have had a extramarital relationship. 19% were men and 14% were women. The marital infidelity gap has been declining since the early 1990s, especially for those under age 45. Male rates have actually decreased, while female rates have actually been on the increase. In committed relationships, married and unmarried, 16% of the partners have reported that they had cheated on one another. So now, next we're going to take a look at why. Why are people unfaithful? And here we have a list of the macro reasons versus the micro reasons. The macro reasons being those larger scale phenomenon in society that impact relationships and marriage. Whereas the micro reasons are those sort of everyday social interactions, those face-to-face interactions that we have in a smaller group size. So first, if you look at the macro reasons, a lot of economic problems, things like unemployment, underemployment, home foreclosures. They put a really strain on relationships and increase the incidence of sexual infidelity. There's been a change in the purpose of marriage for many people. Many couples marry for companionship and intimacy. And when these needs are not being met, they seek outside relationships. Also, the anonymity of urban life encourages infidelity. Not only exposure to larger numbers of potential partners, but you can hide it much easier in a large urban environment. Because we live longer, marriages are lasting longer, and so that increases the chance of conflict dissatisfaction, increase, thus resulting in increased risk of increased infidelity. There's also greater opportunity. People are traveling more, later nights at work, more interaction with their coworkers and who have similar interests and temptations may in fact be tempted to have an affair. We've also noticed a change in gender roles. As women become more economically independent, that increases their opportunity to have an affair. Mass media exposure makes infidelity seem to be a norm and acceptable. You know, in those soap operas, you know, people are cheating on each other all the time. And so, you know, more people see that, they become desensitized to the whole idea. Technological advances, you know, social networks like Facebook have expanded many people's opportunities as well. There are a few negative legal and marital consequences for extramarital sex. In 24 states in the United States, laws define infidelity as a criminal act, but it is rarely used. 50 to 60% of Americans say it is a deal breaker. If this were to happen, the relationship would be over. In terms of the micro reasons, the need for emotional or sexual satisfaction really pushes people toward extramarital affairs. Both men and women say that it's exciting. Sexual infidelity enhances a person's ego. They feel physically attractive. They, you know, builds up their if they have low self-esteem, which is what they're seeking to build their self-confidence. It involves a social exchange. You know, aging men may seek out younger, more attractive women if they have, you know, status and power and prestige or even wealth. People are unfaithful because, you know, another micro reason that people are unfaithful is because they think they can get away with it. Just look at the, you know, the many different politicians that have been in the news and reports of having gotten caught. Maybe they feel like they were not going to get caught. And then we have revenge, or, you know, the infidelity as a you know, revenge or a retaliation. You know, usually against the spouse for some activity. It could be real or imagined. Maybe they think and feel that their spouse is being unfaithful, and so it could be, you know, real, or it could just be imagined. And so they do this in terms of revenge or retaliation for what they perceive. And finally, extramarital relationships may provide a way out of marriage. You know, engaging in infidelity may be a reason, you know, a way to end a marriage that they're not happy in. So what are the consequences? Well, some partners may forgive a transgression, but typically infidelity is the most reported reason for divorce. Person feels deceived, they feel betrayed. And they often become very depressed. It devastates the entire family, and it can really have a negative impact on children. They're confused, they're insecure, especially if the marriage collapses. The effects on public figures who commit adultery is mixed. You know, some are forgiven, but others are not. And extramarital sex, extramarital affairs has a broad structural implication for society because it's seen to threaten the family, the families, you know, being group solidarity. It's group solidarity because family depends on one another for that emotional support and commitment, and this is sort of a threatened transgression to that commitment and support, and so that's how it's viewed in consequence.